So let's move on to what you're famous for. I noticed you have a few books that you're an author of.
Yeah,
which is fantastic. Sure. I want to talk about Incoterms. It's quite a hot topic. What are Incoterms? What do they stand for? And please tell us about your books.
That's the book. That's not my book. It's the International Chamber of Commerce, based in Paris, their head office. And since 1936, these Incoterms, which are called International Commercial Terms, so Incoterms is a condensation of that, they revise these every now and again, and the last 3 revisions have been done every 10 years. And the reason for the changes is generally some change in the methodology or the systems involved in transport or trade. And one of the big things early last decade was 9/11, the Twin Towers in New York that most people are aware of, and terrorism. And the USA brought in lots of control measures to try and stop something like that happening again. And obviously things come into the country is people on planes, but also cargo on planes and ships. So there's lots of restrictions, and so they've incorporated some of the requirements that the Department of Homeland Security in America requires reporting from overseas exports before they actually leave the overseas country. And so they incorporated some of those conditions in here. The European Union now is actually incorporating some of those laws similar to what the US has, and it's making it a lot harder for people exporting to those particular countries to, well, it's not making it harder, but it's the timing of the information that the US government or the European Union government requires. So just adds to the red tape aspect of it. Also, the USA had some rules for domestic trade, and they actually changed those rules within America back in 2004, and so they dealt and basically lobbied the International Chamber of Commerce to incorporate some of the terms that were used to make them appropriate to domestic sales within the USA. So now these terms have always been relating to international. Now it says ICC, which is the International Chamber of Commerce, rules for the use of domestic and international trade. The problem is too that a lot of people misunderstand or misuse the terms. They use a particular term because it's maybe always been done that way.
Like the FOB, for example.
FOB is a typical example, and you're an expert in China, and you're probably familiar that a lot of people use FOB for air freight. And it's a maritime law. It's got to be on a ship or some waterborne vessel. And so that's been a typical thing in many parts of the world, but particularly in China, that using FOB as an air freight term. But it's been clarified, particularly in this revision. It really apparently was the case in the Incoterms 2000, but even for containers on ships today, they suggest you don't use the maritime terms, because the seller has a different point of the risk passing from the seller to the buyer, because generally with containers you're handing it over not at the wharf but at a terminal or a depot if you're loading an LCL container.
If you quote something as FOB, you might be actually taking on risk that you're not really necessary to take on.
And you don't have control over.
Yeah.
That's probably the thing. It's the risk and the control that you may not have.
So just by quoting it that way, you could get yourself in a load of trouble.
Yep.
I got you. All right, and look, what are the most commonly used Incoterms? If someone's importing from China, there are like 3 or 5. There's hundreds, of course, but what are the 5 most common ones that you would recommend people should know?
Yeah, they've actually broken them down from 13 terms to 11 in this current review. And I guess the most common ones would be that I've come across in my activities as a customs broker was probably free on board.
Yep, FOB.
Cost and freight.
CIF,
and CIF, cost, insurance and freight.
Yep.
Now, once again, those 3 terms are sea freight terms. So what I'd be suggesting to people anywhere in the world, but if you're dealing with China, to take away the risk from your contract, and whether that's a seller or an exporter from China, or whether it's the buyer in Australia, both have to look after their own risks and control measures. So I would be suggesting they use free carrier as a term in China if they're selling it from China without looking after the freight. Free carriers, FCA.
FCA, okay.
And that means that the buyer pays the freight when it arrives in their country.
And there's no risk?
The risk is better managed that way by both parties. If it's cost and freight, instead of using that, I would use, whether sea freight or air freight, use Carriage Paid To, where the seller is actually organising the loading onto the aircraft or the vessel and paying the freight to destination.
That's a fantastic tip.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that are?
Well, you're better able, whoever's organising the logistics of the international transport part are better able to manage their risk with their freight forwarder, shipping line, airline, whoever they're using in that respect.
Okay, fantastic. Would you say it's necessary to learn all 11 Incoterms to be a successful importer?
No, I wouldn't say learn them all, but I guess the best way would be to be familiar with them, and so that if you're in a discussion and a term that you're not aware of or not familiar with, you might be a bit bamboozled. So I guess it's better to understand what they are. It's not that hard to learn about them, but just to have an awareness of them. But when you go into a negotiation, I would generally suggest that people have maybe 2 or 3 terms that they would prefer to use themselves, depending on the situation.
So you look like you know what you're doing when you're dealing with the supplier in China.
Exactly.
If you're using common terminology proficiently, you're going to end up getting a better price. If you look like you don't, you're going to get that charge as well. So a lot of these things can be found in the whole customs realm, to look professional and know exactly what you're doing. That's a fantastic tip. Where could someone get? So that's the Incoterms book. Yep. So what's the actual title of it? How would you get a hand?
So it's Incoterms 2010. They can get them straight from Paris, as I did. You can go onto their website and find it there. But most countries will have that available, either through their International Chamber of Commerce affiliate in that country, or through chambers of commerce or business organisations that might be distributing that in their country. Okay. So, check your local country first. If not, go to Paris.
Right, fantastic. And also,
take a trip to Paris. That'd be even better, wouldn't it?
It would be fantastic.
Make a business holiday.
You claim it off for tax as well.